Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1986 cult classic, The Golden Child. Now, this is a film that I honestly, genuinely love. I really enjoy this movie. I find it to be 24 karat entertainment with a electric performance by Eddie Murphy, one of his best. I love his performance in this and the character of Chandler Gerald. It's an example of Eddie Murphy working within a PG-13 rating and it not appearing forced or appearing like he had to cut down on some things. The same wit, the same energy is still present with his performance in this film, despite the fact that it isn't R-rated. This is also a movie that, to me personally, is massively overlooked. This Blu-ray that I've shown you here in this video is not even an official release. And it's a film that, even though it did make some money, Paramount did consider it to be a little bit of a letdown box office wise because it wasn't as big of a hit as Beverly Hills Cop. And it also is a film that tends to be compared to Big Trouble in Little China, which came out the same year as The Golden Child and had similar plot threads. And I get it, but I don't think that should be something that should be a deterrent or something that should detract from The Golden Child just because it has some similarities plot-wise to one of the best action fantasy comedies ever made. So I don't get it. I don't understand why people look at it and say, "Oh, it pales in comparison to Big Trouble in Little China." It's not. It's not like it's a straight up ripoff of Big Trouble in Little China. And also, we have no idea for sure which film was written first. And I enjoy both of them a lot. So I don't really see the problem. I don't. I don't know why Eddie doesn't like this movie. That's another thing I don't understand. Apparently, Eddie Murphy and also Charles Dance feel that this version of the film is inferior because the original version was different, and then they had to do some reshoots and have Eddie shoot some more Beverly Hills Cop kind of sequences with him riffing, and they felt that that wasn't really the film they signed on for. And Charles Dance even said that it was a bad thing, that it was just Beverly Hills Cop in Tibet. And I'm like, how is that a bad thing? Isn't that what a lot of audiences wanted? Isn't that what you want out of an Eddie Murphy movie? Is a kind of Axel Foley kind of wisecracking character in Tibet fighting demons and dealing with mysticism and shit? Like, that's what I wanted out of this particular plot. I didn't want a serious take. So, I don't really see the problem with Beverly Hills Cop in Tibet. That's one of the reasons why I love this movie. It basically is Beverly Hills Cop in Tibet, and it's an absolute blast to watch. So, The Golden Child is directed by Michael Ritchie. He was not the first choice for the director, though. Eddie Murphy really wanted George Miller for whatever reason. But Eddie actually stiffed George and showed up really late to the meeting between the two. And so George was like, nah, I'm not going to commit to a project where the main star and one of the producers doesn't even want to get to the meeting on time. So I don't blame him. So eventually they went with Michael Ritchie, who had directed Fletch. And I think Michael Ritchie was a good choice, especially due to the comedic aspects of this film. With the comedy elements, he was a really good choice. When it pertains to the action elements, though, not really the best. I don't think he did a really. I would say one of the weakest aspects of this film is the action. When it is there, it's all right. I would say some of the fisticuffs, some of the stuff here and there is decent, but it's nothing spectacular. There's a little bit of a car chase at one point that I thought was fairly well shot near the climax, but it's not really the best film when it comes to the action. I definitely feel Beverly Hills Cop 2 or even the first Beverly Hills Cop has better action than The Golden Child. So if there's any little bit of a letdown, I would say it's in that department for me. But Michael Ritchie is still capable, did a good job shooting the more grand sequences that take place in Tibet or in more unique locations. and I felt he worked well with the effects and so on and so forth, and also got a lot out of his cast. So overall, I think it's a good job. I just I don't think it's a great film when it comes to direction, but it's a solid film when it comes to the person behind the camera, nonetheless. Now, there are some other things too. I guess John Carpenter was actually offered the job, but he turned it down to do Big Trouble in Little China. And it would have been interesting to see what JC would have done with Eddie Murphy at the peak of his prowess. But I'm glad that he did Big Trouble in Little China instead, because that's one of my favorite films that he's done, and one of my favorite films, period. I really enjoy this film, but it's not quite on the same level as Big Trouble, but it's really close. The more times I watch this film, the more I really enjoy it, and the more I appreciate it. And it's one of those movies that really grew on me in the first place. I do remember watching it a few times on VHS when I was a kid, but I wasn't like in love with it or anything. But the more that I watched it over the years, the more and more I really started to enjoy the film. In particular, Eddie Murphy. I think he's just great in this. And I also like the fish out of water aspect. You know, Eddie Murphy playing a wisecracking uh, character who named Chandler Jarrell, who's looking for missing children, and he gets involved in this quest to find the golden child and save the golden child from an ancient demon. I mean, it's an absurd idea, but it works. And a big reason why is because you have this everyman character in Chandler who's commenting on all of these ridiculous, crazy scenarios that he's put into. Now, also, this film initially was not intended to be a comedy fantasy. It was actually intended to be a more serious fantasy action film, and the original concept and pitch for the film involved Mel Gibson as the lead. But ultimately, Paramount decided not to do that because Gibson turned down the role, and Eddie Murphy was asked to do it, and Eddie Murphy agreed. And so then they retooled things and changed things around to suit Eddie and to be a more comedic take versus the Mel Gibson version. The screenplay also by Dennis Feldman. I believe it was a script that was, yeah, it was a screenplay that was highly sought after. Dennis Feldman was a professional photographer whose only writing credit before this was just One of the Guys, that movie where a girl pretends to be a guy and in high school and all kinds of shenanigans ensue. But anyway, that was his only writing credit. So then he wrote a script called The Rose of Tibet, which he planned as a Raymond Chandler movie with supernatural elements, and it apparently attracted Hollywood's attention, and there was a bidding war, and Paramount won the war with a price tag of $300,000, which is a huge chunk of change even for back in 1986. So Paramount bought the rights, and that was the more serious version that Mel Gibson was going to be in, and then they got Eddie Murphy involved, and they changed things around. And I'm really wondering how much of his script is actually in the movie, and how much of the film is just Eddie riffing. But regardless, I do feel the screenplay is honestly quite solid. I think it's a good script. I like the edge that it has. There's humor here, and there's a lot of levity and a lot of jokes, but there's an edge to it, though. There's kids who are being killed. There's children's blood that's being put into oatmeal, and the villains are trying to feed it to the golden child so he can be corrupt, and so they can kill him and take over the world. It's one of those things where it's a PG-13 film, but it's a PG-13 in the 80s, so they're able to get away with a little bit more. There's some blood here and there. There's a little bit more graphic violence. There's a lot of swearing. There really isn't much like they don't drop the F-bomb or anything, but there definitely is a lot of ass. The word ass is said a lot in this one, and almost at the point where it's a little bit too much. Like, it became a bit of a crutch for Eddie. Like, he just kept saying ass, ass, ass. But regardless, it still works because there's a lot of really hilarious lines that have the word ass in them. In particular, he does this whole repeated gag where he's all like, "I'm gonna beat your ass when I get out of here," or the whole, "I'm gonna roll your ass until it bleeds." So yeah, there's a lot of ass in the Golden Child. I mean, the beginning of the movie, there's a gag after the whole intro with Sardo Numsa and the Tibetan landscape that's introduced in the beginning of the movie, which looks like it's from a completely different film, to be honest. It's a really weird intro. It's like, boom, here it looks like we're in a fantasy epic film, and then it cuts to Eddie on the streets and ripping a guy who's looking at a magazine called Chunky Asses. Yeah, it starts out with ass. So yeah, there's a lot of, it's kind of, it definitely is something that is quite prominent in this movie. Butt pie, butt cake, chunky asses. That just cracks me up. That scene kills me every time. It's just the absurdity of it all. The guy's reading a magazine called Chunky Asses, and then Eddie comes up and he's like, "Chunky Asses." But yeah. So keeping with the trivia, a little bit of the backstory. There was a teaser trailer for the film that has never been released that had Eddie on, I believe, on the back of a yak. He was riding a yak, and he was in Tibet, and it was in the snow, and it was shot by Vilmos Zsigmond, who did the cinematography. And he's riding a yak through a blizzard, and he complains with this quote. He's like, "If I'm the chosen one, how come I'm freezing while you're sitting in a warm movie theater? Chosen one, my behind. Why couldn't someone choose me to go to the beyond Bahamas?" And then that's your teaser trailer. But it's never been released. Not on DVD, not online, not anywhere. I would love to see that, actually. I think that would be a lot of fun to see that teaser trailer. I'm hoping if Shout Factory does a Blu-ray of this for their Shout Select series, which this is a perfect title for that, I hope that they find that teaser trailer. Alan Silvestri was apparently the original choice to write the score. He even met with the producers. But it was then announced that John Barry got the job. But John Barry ultimately did a finished score for the film. The test screening audiences weren't really that fond of it, and neither was the studio. So John Barry was replaced by Michael Colombier. And this is a score that is definitely more in the vibe of Harold Faltermeyer's work in Beverly Hills Cop. And I've heard John Barry's score, and it's decent. I don't necessarily feel it fits with the vibe or the tone of the film, so I feel that the Harold Faltermeyer-esque score by Michael Colombier, I think it actually works better for this movie. And I actually legitimately like that score. I like Michael's score. I love the main theme. Da, 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 da. So yeah, I like that main score. I've always liked that main theme, and of course you have the theme song, which is sung by Ann Wilson of Heart, one of the best vocalists ever, and she sings a really great track in Best Man in the World that opens up the film with a really fun montage with Eddie just messing around with people on the streets of I believe, I'm trying to remember like where this takes place in. Yeah, on the streets of Los Angeles, because he's an LA detective who's responsible for looking for missing children. So yeah, John Barry ultimately got replaced by Michael Colombier, And that is essentially kind of where the trivia ends. I definitely wanted to share those bits of trivia because I felt that they were interesting. Now there's a little bit extra stuff too that I'll get to later, but let's actually get into the reviews, shall we? So I already talked about Michael Ritchie's direction. I liked it, but it could have been better. The screenplay, I think Dennis Feldman. I do love the concept of the Eastern mysticism mixed in with a fish out of water storyline. And I do feel that is quite well done. The humor, I think, is hilarious, and I really do doubt that was really his doing. The film stars, of course, Eddie Murphy as Chandler Jarrell, J.L. Reate is a golden child. This is a actress who only did this movie and then did not do anything else afterwards. Although she did do a little bit of a reunion with Eddie Murphy fairly recently, and apparently it went well. So maybe Eddie has changed his mind on the movie. I hope that's the case because I would love to hear his thoughts on it, for better or worse. I really would. Charles Dance plays the villain Sardo Numsa, who's a demon. That's really what he is. He's a demon. And Charles Dance is devilishly awesome, as always. He's so good at playing these kinds of roles. Charlotte Lewis plays Lee Nang. Key Nang, actually, is her name. And she is the love interest, and honestly, the one that kicks most of the ass in this film. I really liked her. I thought she was great. Not only just because you get to see her nipples, but I mean you do, like, for a PG-13 film, like you really do see quite a lot. Like, she gets drenched with water, and you definitely see some nipples because her t-shirt is just absolutely soaking wet, and she's not wearing anything underneath it, not even a bra. So I'm pretty sure that was probably some young men's first exposure to something that turned them on, or nudity in some form, or the first time they saw a wet t-shirt might have actually been in this movie. But she's not just eye candy. I think she does a really good job with the role. She has good chemistry with Eddie Murphy, and she's capable when it comes to the physical stunts and stuff like that. I don't know if she did a lot of she probably didn't do a lot of the flips and stuff. That's probably someone else. But regardless, I thought she did a good job with the role. Victor Wong's also in this as old Goopa, who's her father. He has a really fun cameo where he's messing around with Eddie Murphy, and he's the one that is talking to Eddie when Eddie's doing this trial to try to get the knife, and he's going through all these obstacles, and Eddie stops for a bit, and he's like, "How many people have survived this test?" And then he's like, "None!" And he's like, "None? None? I'm gonna bust your ass when I get out of here." Oh man, I love that scene. And it's just they have a nice back and forth with one another. Randall Tex Cobb is also in this as a disfigured henchman for Charles Dance, who has a change of heart because the golden child touches him and turns him good. Apparently, Randall Tex Cobb had a really bad flatulence problem, from what I've heard, and he just kept farting and just crop dusting throughout the entire filming, and Eddie was not really a fan of that, and I don't think anyone else was. If that's true, like, whoa. I do like Randall Tex Cobb. I've liked him ever since I saw him in Raising Arizona, and so it's nice to see him even just for a little bit in this particular film. The rest of the cast is fine too. You even have James Hong, who has a bit role, who was also, of course, Lo Pan in Big Trouble in Little China. But that's really the main cast here. The Big Trouble in Little China stuff doesn't end, though, because there is the same actor who is in Big Trouble in Little China, who played one of the storms. He's also in this. I think it's Tiger Chung Lee, although I could be wrong, but I think that's who it is. And you also have Eric Douglas, one of the sons of Kirk Douglas, who's in this as one of the Yellow Dragons. Um, so yeah, really good cast. They all work well with one another, but it's absolutely Eddie's film. He's up front and center, and he's so enjoyable and fun to watch. So many fun lines of dialogue that he says in this. Only a man whose heart is pure can wield the knife, and only a man whose ass is narrow can get down these steps. And if mine is such an ass, then I shall have it. And the whole thing where it's like, I want the knife, please. Ha! I got the knife. Now turn on the goddamn lights. Oh man, I love watching Eddie Murphy in this. I love his dialogue, the sequences that he's in. He sees the golden child floating in the trees somewhere, and he was like, "Hey, bird, did you see a little boy floating around the tree? Hey, bird, did you just see a little Hare Krishna midget in the tree floating, or was it me?" And then the phone rings, and he's like, "Must be Rod Serling." Just so many great stuff. The stuff with Sardo Numsa, um, and he's just ribbing him. He's just giving him a hard time. It's like, I must be purged. I must be flogged. Or so the one where he's in the dream, and Sardo is trying to get him to make a deal. It's like, since this is a dream, I could say anything I want, right? So I have to sincerely say from the bottom of my heart, kiss my ass. Oh man, it's just so great to see this wise ass character in this kind of particular fantasy plot line. So yeah, Eddie is just a joy to watch in this, and really is the biggest reason why this film is as good as it is. But there are some other things that are quite notable about the film. Like I said, the score from Michael Colombier, the song by Ann Wilson, Best Man in the World. Some bits of John Barry's score aren't bad because they are still in the film. I also felt it was well shot by Donald E. Thorin, who did the cinematography, and it was also excellently edited by Richard A. Harris. It goes by at a really quick pace. It's only 94 minutes, and really does not have a dull moment. Although I would have liked to have had a little bit more action. Regardless, it's quite a fast-paced affair. And it has some really great visual effects by Industrial Light and Magic, who did the effects work for this. I really love the look of the demon Numsa. It was quite unique for the time because it wasn't your typical kind of demon look. It was very rough and raw looking, and I really liked that about it. And I also felt that the production and art design was really well done. The look of the temple in Tibet, the setup, the set design for the sequence where where Chandler goes in and does the trials and tries to get the knife. I thought that was a pretty cool looking set. I also felt that from another visual effects standpoint, the sequences that take place in hell when Sardo is talking to what we essentially assume is the devil. I thought those were really well done. I thought that was some really great looking rotoscoping and effects work. Really put the 1997 film Spawn to shame there. And of course, it was always great to hear Frank Welker, who voiced Satan, and he's just such a great voice actor, and of course he was just so perfect for that role. And I think he's voiced the devil in more than one film, and apparently it's not really called the devil because he just gets a voice credit as the Thing. But come on, let's be honest, you know it's the devil. But yeah, I like that aspect of it as well. So there's a lot of just stuff about this that I really enjoy. Um, and I also like the fact that there is a little bit of intrigue and suspense near the end because she gets shot with an arrow, and then it's a race against time for Chandler to save the golden child and kill Sardo before the sun goes down. Otherwise, she's going to be lost forever. It probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I thought it was an interesting idea that, oh, nobody really dies until the sun goes down, and then their spirit is lost forever and they can never be brought back to life. It added a nice little extra bit of suspense to the climax because it made the stakes even higher than they already were. But I really don't know what else to say about the film except I definitely would recommend you check this out if you haven't seen it already, especially if you're a fan of Big Trouble in Little China or Eddie Murphy films. I don't really understand why it was not well received by critics. I think Roger Ebert liked it, which is cool. But a lot of it seems to have a pretty mixed view from critics. I don't know. Maybe they were smoking too many scrolls because I don't really understand why this got so many negative reviews. Also, one more thing I want to mention is definitely this knife. I think it's a pretty cool looking knife. I think it's a good design. And also, there is a novelization of this film, which apparently is closer to the original screenplay and what Eddie and Charles Dance apparently wanted for the film. And I do remember it being a good read. So if you're a fan of the film or you're just curious about what an alternate version of this movie might have been, pick up the novelization sometime. I think it's definitely going to be worth your while. But anyway, yeah, I don't really know what to say about the film except I give it 2 thumbs up, way up, because it's just an entertaining, enjoyable, fast-paced, funny, and genuinely wonderful to watch comedy fantasy with Eddie Murphy at the peak of his prowess and the peak of his prime, just being an absolute blast to watch him work. Of course, I just remembered one more scene I wanted to mention because it's just a prime example of why Eddie works so well in this film, because it's such a, honestly, kind of a generic scene where he's just trying to find a way to get into the house where there's some bikers at, where he can get some more information, and he crosses into a backyard barbecue, and he's just like, hey, whoa, 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 all I want is a chip. I just want a chip. It's just such a generic line of dialogue, but Eddie is so good at being such a charismatic guy that he makes that scene funny when there isn't really any gag other than he just wants a chip. So yeah, I can't really say enough about this film. I've said a lot as it is, probably more than some have, but probably less than others have. And it's just a movie that puts a giant smile on my face every time I watch it. And it really is a shame that this isn't better received. It's a shame that this wasn't a bigger hit. And it's a shame that it isn't on Blu-ray. Get it officially on Blu-ray already. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of The Golden Child. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.